Does Overwatch make people toxic? I don't know, it just seems like there's something about this game that brings out the worst in people, but what could that be exactly? I thought that would make for an interesting discussion to figure out what exactly it is about Overwatch that seemingly aggravates people so much. I would like to quickly dismiss the notion that Overwatch is worse than any other competitive game. Comparison to League and CSGO have been made numerous times, but as it stands, anything that's remotely competitive brings out this sort of aggressive do-or-die behavior. Sure, it may just be a game, but the point of the game is still winning. In that regard, if you're not winning the game, you're not playing it properly. At least that's what many people seem to think while playing. Ultimately, losing is as much part of the experience as winning. In fact, losses can often teach us far more than victories, looking at what we have been doing wrong or what the opponents have done better. This usually does not matter to the average competitive player though. A loss in a competitive video game is often regarded as a waste of time, especially when there are things to be won, such as digital rewards or even just the bragging rights for reaching a high rank. Nothing is as fragile as our egos, so naturally something that ticks us off really quickly is the implication that we're not as good at whatever we're doing as we thought. Players often look at other reasons to blame for their losses because admitting fault is seen as a sort of weakness. And this in particular is something that Overwatch plays into way too nicely. There are conveniently many things a player can blame for their loss, starting with the most obvious one, the other 5 people on their team. Overwatch is the type of game that does not just throw people into a team to have them play together, it very much relies on the entirety of the team to do their jobs properly. That's what is most important. When getting into a higher level of play, not only individual skill and the ability to play your hero of choice properly matter, but also the way your team plays as a whole, synergizing their skills, communicating strategies, and reacting quickly to whatever they are opposing. Naturally, if just one player is not doing their job properly or is even bad at it, that can be a massive problem. In the same vein, a player disconnecting or trolling can be just as much of a detriment to the team as someone who just isn't good at their role. There are numerous ways a player can fail at their given role. A tank who is playing too aggressively instead of protecting their team, a DPS player who does not confirm any kills, or a support player who'd much rather play DPS and by that neglects his job as a healer. If a player is under the impression that they are doing their job sufficiently and yet they lose, then this is a very frustrating feeling because they couldn't have done anything better to improve their chances of winning if the rest of the team just is not performing accordingly. Unfortunately, this is just the kind of game that Overwatch is. It was built from the ground up with team play in mind. But this is one of the reasons players get so frustrated, playing as well as they can but still losing due to the incompetence of their team. Something that reinforces this feeling is the information coming from the game itself. A DPS player could have spent the entire match damaging enemies without confirming any kills, yet their stats would display shiny gold medals that indicate that they have been the best in their team for this particular purpose, even when the purpose itself is so generic that it does not hold any sort of indication for whether or not their gameplay actually contributed to a win. However, gold medals, cards, and the play of the game are the only indications the game gives us for performance, and all of these are unfortunately worthless. It is quite admittingly a difficult problem to tackle because of how versatile Overwatch is. Writing an algorithm together with a scoreboard that accurately shows player performance for getting kills, heals, or blocking damage when it actually mattered is no easy task, if not impossible, thanks to the variety of hero comps and maps that we encounter. It is definitely a worthwhile argument to have as to whether giving false or easily misinterpreted information is better than giving no information at all. The tutorial and practice range do an absolutely poor job of teaching players what actually matters in a competitive match, so unless you've learned the game through trial and error or watched a bunch of high-skilled players talk about things like staggering, regrouping, alt economy, or even basic and advanced counters, chances are that your perception of what is good gameplay in regards to actually contributing to a win might be skewed in some way. Just to mark a little progression point in our discussion, so far we have figured out that the nature of the heavily team-reliant gameplay can be frustrating for players because it is very well possible for them to end up in a situation where they play as good as they can, but still lose the game because the rest of their team didn't do the same. Combining that with the information the game is giving us, validating our performance even when our gameplay was not necessarily contributing to a win as much as it could have, and sometimes didn't do so at all, we found a very clear indication for why players could have this tendency of becoming toxic. Next to that, we have the obvious competitive nature of the game itself. But is there more? Possibly. If we look at the way our current ladder system works, obviously the different divisions are supposed to separate players of varying skill levels in an attempt to create balanced matches. The problem in Overwatch is that there's more than one thing that can clearly define as skill, and by that the reason why a player has reached their respective rank. Usually, skill in shooters refers to the mechanical act of aiming, a very clear and obvious indication for skill. In a lot of games we can also add things like game sense and map awareness to it. As we reach higher levels of play, communication and team synergy also become factors. That is reasonably comprehensive if you think about it. In Overwatch, we have a pretty big cast of heroes that each require their own skill set. You can't just say that those heroes' skill is exclusively limited to aiming, soaking, or healing, as there's far more that goes into each individual hero. While as Reinhardt, you do want to soak damage for their team since you're the tank. If you're being indecisive and don't move in, your team can't make a move on the objective. Sure, you fulfilled your job of taking damage for the team so they don't die, but you failed your job that is the initiation of a push. Then we look at Roadhog, whom you don't want to have soaking too much damage all the time because unlike Reinhardt's shield, him taking damage gives the enemy's ultimate charge. Yet both of these heroes are classified as tanks. We also have very obvious differences in hero design where someone like McCree or Widowmaker requires a lot of mechanical skill in the form of aim, whereas Soldier or Junkrat do less so. And then there are heroes like Pharah and Mei with her left click, whose skill comes down to positioning and movement prediction to land their projectiles. And yet all these heroes share the same role in a team comp, and that they're supposed to do damage if we're talking about the most basic layer of role distribution. Of course, we also have things like game sense, which is massive in Overwatch, but also map awareness, team coordination, ult economy, and so many other things that all go into a player's profile for how skilled he is. All of this results in players with varying levels of all of these skill sets to end up in a variety of ranks. You can have players with lots of game sense and knowledge of the game's mechanics in a high rank, even though they're average at best on a mechanical level. Or players who are really good on a set few heroes but have little to no knowledge of anything else, particularly the team-based aspect of the game. Now all this sounds like Overwatch is an incredibly difficult game to play, but quite the opposite is the case. There are heroes that are just plain and simply said easier to play than others, and you don't concern yourself with what is skilled or not until you reach a certain point in your gameplay experience, which likely involves ranked. And this shows on ladder as well, where you will see certain heroes being favored over others depending on which division we're talking about. If we take our previous points into consideration that relate to false validation of gameplay performance, that means that we have players that thought they were really good at the game because they played a hero that is rather simple and effective in a low rank, but is suddenly being shut down hard in a higher rank. Naturally, as we discussed earlier, most players' reaction will be to blame those around them, rather than considering the fact that what has brought them to their rank no longer works the way they know it. The confrontation with other players is obviously another factor. If we take our example player who does not understand that he has to work on his gameplay to perform in a higher rank, this player might start arguing with a person who tries to tell them that their tricks do not work anymore. After all, the game itself kept validating their performance, and again, it has worked all the way up until now, so how can you expect a player like this to just suddenly accept another truth to be the case? So we got the heavily team-reliant nature of the game, false validation of gameplay performance, the competitive nature of the game itself, and the fact that only parts of the large skill set that makes a truly good player are necessary to reach a high rank, meaning that somebody can be absolutely oblivious to a bunch of concepts that are necessary to perform well on a certain level, causing argument and dispute between players. This ties into the fact that things that we mentioned before, like ult economy, are never brought up in the game itself, thus it is not something that some players would consider a definitive truth, or they might just be plain oblivious to it. Since the game itself does not tell us any of those things, there's a lot of room for discussion and dispute among players who think they know best, thanks to the next point I'd like to bring up, and that is content creators such as myself, but far more successful than me of course, and good looking. It obviously becomes a problem when content creators and pro players, who are often streamers as well, toss information at the players who are then left to decide whether or not they want to believe any of it and who they should listen to in the first place. A pro player's perspective, while certainly interesting for those playing in high elo, does rarely ever take the average gamer into perspective. When a pro player talks about things that work for them, it is important to be aware of the fact that they are in an entirely different situation than most of their viewers. Most players do not have an entire team that they play with regularly, nor do they have the freedom to play this game all day long to practice. Needless to say that a group of random solo queues will never achieve the level of coordination a pro team displays during tournaments, even when they are in a high elo. Thus, the practice of taking the pro meta and trying to apply it in lower elo in solo queue is often reason for dispute among players as well. But even the good old-fashioned YouTubers are not always good sources for improving at the game. Obviously, it helps to listen to somebody who made similar experiences as you, say they have been through the rank grind of reaching a high rank coming from a fairly low one. The problem is that especially we guys making videos like to get kind of full of ourselves at times. There will be occasions where you'll see videos coming from a YouTuber stating something as a definitive truth, when in fact it was merely their experience, sometimes even a fairly niche one at that. Obviously, we're just random people making videos of things that we find interesting and worth talking about, so it is also in the consumer's responsibility to get themselves more than just one source and not believe every word coming from a single YouTuber's mouth, no matter how big or small their channel is. But that too is part of the reason for conflict and ultimately toxicity in the game. Us making videos on things, those things not always agreeing with each other, and then having people argue who like to believe one content creator more than the other. And I think I can wrap the video up here. I actually had a lot of fun writing the script for this video and trying to find out what are the exact things in Overwatch that could be the reason that some people perceive the game's community to be especially toxic. I still stand by my opinion that I don't think Overwatch is any more toxic than any other competitive game, and everyone will inevitably have different experiences depending on the kind of players they meet along the way. Hell, those experiences can even vary strongly on a day-by-day basis. By the way, some people just like to behave like assholes because they're, newsflash, assholes, but I didn't find that very interesting to talk about. At the end of the day, this discussion was as much pointless as it was fun to have, and that's what ultimately gives my videos the me flavor, talking about things that I find interesting. If you would like to express your feelings, feel free to do so with a thumbs up or a thumbs down. If you would like to weigh in on the discussion, you can also do so down in the comment section below. But this is me done for the day, so thank you everybody so much for watching, have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you all next time. Yeah, that was a zoning up, by the way. I learned that watching NA streams. They do this a lot. They just to new players, it always looks like they just burn the ultimates. In fact, it's a high-end strategy, very advanced.